morning, everyone. Welcome to another week of Freshwater Community Church at Home. My name's Ash, and I'm one of the pastors here at the church, and just have an announcement that I'd like to give before we go into a time of worship and teaching. You may have seen a few days ago on our Facebook page that our pastor Troy released a video just detailing some watch parties. This is going to be the first step of our reopening process. And so at the moment, you can meet indoors with 10 or fewer people with social distancing, and outdoors we have groups of up to 100 that's able to meet. If you want to organize some kind of watch party with up to 100 people, then more power to you. But this is the way that we're going to start reopening the church. We want to get back to some kind of normalization, and since we're in this study of Acts, this is almost kind of how the early church would have begun. So if you have any questions on how to maybe implement a watch party, you don't know the logistics of it, then there's a few emails on here that you can reach out to, myself and Justin, and we'll be able to help you just organize any logistics. If you're not in a group, but you'd want to join with a watch party, then we can help you do that as well. So just reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help in any way that we can. So as we go into a time of worship, would you join me in prayer? Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for today. And we thank you, Lord, for the exciting next steps of being able to begin to reopen and just being able to meet together with a small group of people. I just pray that you would help us to find a group if we don't have one, but I pray that we'd also just use this time to draw closer to the people that we're watching the sermons with. And I pray now as we go into worship, Lord, that we just have this great opportunity to worship together, that we'll be able to worship in the throne room. We just thank you for worship and the opportunity that it gives us to posture ourselves before you. And I pray now as we sing these words, as we hear these melodies, we just have this great celebration of who you are and what you do and what you've done. And we love you and pray this in your name, God. Amen.
When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken, oh. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. But my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. But my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide. I am not a captive to the lies. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind, 'cause I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. But my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. But my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh, oh. doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned and unclean. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and I wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned and unclean, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song it shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. He took my sins and my sorrows, he made them his very own. He bore the burden of Calvary, and he suffered and died alone. Took my sin, he took my sins and my sorrows, he made them his very own. He bore the burden of Calvary, and he suffered and died alone, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, in my song it shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. When with the ransomed in glory, his face I at last shall see, it will be my joy through the ages, and to sing of his love for me. It went with the ransomed in glory, his face I at last shall see. It will be my joy through the ages, oh, to sing of his love for me, singing how it shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me.
Hey, good morning. It's Pastor Troy. Welcome. I'm going to do what I've been doing. I just love these shout outs because I feel a huge portion of the church is people. That's what we are. And I miss you guys. And I'm going to give a shout out. Jen Price. Jen Price, I hope you're doing well. I was just over in your neck of the woods the other day at Tim's house, getting my car fixed. Hope you're blessed. Hope you and John are doing well. And yeah, I've enjoyed a couple of your posts on social media. Here's another one. Carly Parsley. Carly Parsley. How you doing? How's the Parsley family doing? You probably got your hands full with those young kids and stuff. So blessings. Let me do one more here. Oh, it's a bunch of gals today. Elizabeth Fleming. Elizabeth Fleming, how are you doing? How are you and your family? We in our family call you Queen Elizabeth. You know that when we first met you, to remember your name. Hope the Flemings are great. Miss you guys. Love your husband, even though he's a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Hope you guys are doing well. I'm going to set this aside. And that was my shout outs. I'm already behind on my slides. But welcome. There's some shout outs. And I just want to start with this kind of obvious fact for us. America's in crisis. 2020 has been an unbelievable year, the craziest year of my life, the biggest crisis, the biggest stress, the biggest confusing situation that I've ever been part of. It started out with this coronavirus, and at first there's little jokes like, you know, who started this, and was it when people ate the Popeye chicken sandwiches instead of God's sandwiches over at Chick-fil-A, and I was part of that, and it was kind of funny, but it is becoming increasingly more difficult. The coronavirus kicked off a health crisis, which then kicked off an economic crisis, that then kicked off a mental health crisis, and then a relational crisis where people were fighting over what sheltering in place should look like, what kind of things should we do, mask, no mask, and there's a lot of tension there. And right when it seemed like we were gonna get back, right when it looked like, okay, things are gonna start happening, we're gonna reopen, things are gonna be good, then this video surfaced of a Minneapolis police officer killing George Floyd. Just horrific. And that started a racial crisis, which probably has been compounded by everybody being pent up, but it has been consuming our nation and consuming our social media and consuming our hearts, and it's just awful. And I'm going to tell you this. I don't make a practice of watching videos where people die. I think most of us are like that. But after quite a while of thinking and praying and wondering, I watched this video and it was horrific. And I knew why I didn't want to watch it, because I wanted to be able to stop it and to watch this. And if you haven't watched it, you're going to have to do some work with your conscience and the Lord if you should watch this or not. But for almost 9 minutes, this police officer put his knee on the back of this man's neck. And the man's crying out for his mother. The man is saying, I can't breathe. Most of us know this, have seen this video. But what I wasn't aware of, there's a point then he became unresponsive, and it continued for minutes after that. And the thing that shocked me the most in this video is there were people there yelling at the officers, almost threatening the officers, and they did not stop. And watching the video, you can understand why this is sent shockwaves through most of the human race. It's sent shockwaves around the world, and the Black community, the African-American community has just been horrified by it. And nobody wants to give any kind of sympathy. And you may disagree with me, but police officers are good. Police officers are horrified by this too. This is just tragedy on so many levels. And I just want to say, I can't even imagine being a Black person, an African-American person in this time. I can't even imagine what that would trigger or feel or remind or reinforce or how that would mess with them. It's just devastating. And so in a crisis, we need Christ. I really believe this. Like, it'd be so amazing to like turn on our TV and there's Jesus. And like, oh, thank you, Jesus is here. And Jesus could talk about justice and could rebuke, and Jesus could cause transformation and healing and give us wisdom. We need Jesus so bad right now. There's so many people attempting to help, and there's very productive ways and unproductive ways, but we need Jesus. We need Christ in a crisis. That's what we need. But God kind of pushed me a little further on this, and this is an overwhelming and difficult challenge, but the challenge to the church and anyone that is a Christ follower is be Christ in the crisis. We need to stand up for justice. I called one of my black friends this week, and she said, thanks for calling, Troy, because I just said, how are you doing? How can I help? How are you feeling? And she said, stand up against all injustice. So we need to be Christ. We need to stand up against injustice. We need to call for reforms, and we need to bring forgiveness and to the people that have been hurt, and we need to change, and we need to love and heal all these things. And like, how do we do this? So let me tell you how God has instructed me to live and challenge me to challenge you how to live. Last week, my daughter got married, and the week before I took a week of vacation just to get the property ready, and it was messy weather and different things, and I'm just trying to, like, with this coronavirus, do everything I can to make Emily's day great. And we decided to do an outdoor wedding. A lot of things had changed because of the virus, and I was just praying, Lord, just give us, she's given up so much, so many things have happened. I know there's tragedies in the world, but this little girl's dream of a dream wedding, it's probably not gonna happen. Just give us a nice day. And it was incredible. It was so wonderful. I can get emotional about it. My daughter looked so beautiful, and Payne looked awesome, and they looked so happy together. And Colin did the sermon, and he preached a killer wedding message. It was just awesome. And we were just having a victory lap and thanking God for that. So I kind of knew about this George Floyd thing, but I was just consumed. My wife told me my calling was to get this wedding ready. I'm just joking, but we just both were like in this. So Sunday we took a victory lap, and I went to bed, and Monday morning I woke up, and I do something I do every morning. I began to pray, and I pray before I get out of bed. And I usually pray the Lord's Prayer and some other things and just talk. And this is often where the Lord speaks to me, gives me ideas or leads me. And I was praying, and the Lord said, I want you to pause the Acts series and talk about George Floyd and all the ramifications. And I don't usually fight the Lord when he tells me to do something clearly, but he knew my heart, and I was like, Lord, I don't really want to do this. And kind of the conversation went like, I know. And I said, I just don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And who am I? I'm a white guy in a mainly white community. I've grown up in all rural places. I've just mainly been in this, I've been in farmland most of my life. And the Lord said this to me. Listen. Just listen. Listen and ask questions and think and process things. In fact, he shared this verse with me, or reminded me of this verse that many of us know, but the familiarity with this, don't just go, oh yeah, I've heard that. This is so important. This is a way to better ministry. This is a better way to be transformed personally. This verse here is a better way to raise teenagers. This is a better way to understand what people perceive about you. This is if people in corporations use this in their corporate settings and any discussion we ever had, and especially in this situation. My dear brothers, so it's addressed to Christians, so this is a calling to us, but it works everywhere. Take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And you know what? We live in a society that we're quick to speak, quick to give our opinion. And now, 20 years ago, if you wanted to get a group of people together, you would have to call a bunch of people and have a speech to perform or to share with people, which a lot of people hate to do. Or you would have had to write something and hope it get published to get this huge audience. But now, any of us that are over 12 years old can get on a keyboard or on a phone and just broadcast, so we're quick to speak. And the Bible tells us that we need to be quick to listen. And listening is one of the most underrated things. When somebody's going through something, they need somebody to listen. When somebody's got a bunch of confusion and hurt and anger and trying to sort through things, listening, asking questions and listening to them begins to where we go into the depth and we get into where the thoughts and feelings and who we are is, and we get into the heart and the soul of the person. Listening actually can help transform us because it can help expose things in our heart. The Bible tells us that the heart is desperately wicked, beyond knowing, that it's deceitful. The Bible tells us, and this is where racism resides, right? It's not a skin color issue. It's a heart issue, but our heart lies. Our heart lies. You think the person that's lied the most to you lives in Washington, D.C.? Or is like a real bad friend? It's your heart that lies to you. And so what happens when we listen to people, especially in this case, when we listen to people and we listen to our African-American brothers and sisters in that community, we begin to understand things that maybe we didn't understand before, and it might even expose things in us that we didn't know. Psalm 19:12 says, who can discern their own errors? Who can know what's going on in their own heart? Forgive me for my hidden sin, which means there's times that there's things in us that we don't know. And let me give you an example here. When I've talked to people about racism, or people have talked to me about racism, most of the time the conversation goes like this: I'm not racist. And we point to maybe some relative that we know, or great uncle, or somebody older. Man, my great grandpa used to say terrible things. That's not me. And I'm just wondering, as you listen, and as we listen to the African-American community and we just absorb instead of being quick to just give our opinion and say things that maybe we don't know the ramifications or what that triggers in the experience of these people, maybe if we listen, we will begin to understand that there's some things in us. Maybe we wouldn't call it racist. Maybe we call it bias. Maybe we call it discrimination. Maybe we call it prejudice. But James, the half-brother of Jesus, said there shouldn't even be favoritism. That means like we shouldn't even be like, oh, I prefer this person, or this person's wealthy. He talks about this in James 2. Check that. So the standard isn't just like, oh, don't be a racist and don't use these terrible words, but we get to the point where we unlabel people. We don't use titles. We don't see anybody as a race. We see it as a human race. We understand differences, and I guess it's offensive to say that you don't see color. So see color, but everybody becomes a brother and a sister. And I just think it's interesting. I've heard pastors talk about lust, anger, gossip, lying, deceit. I've heard our community of people in the church always talking about different sins. And when it gets to that thing of racism, I'm not. Is that a Psalm 19:12 issue where show me my hidden sin? Reveal this, forgive me of my hidden sin. I've heard one pastor admit that they've struggled with racism. And I'm going to, maybe you've never heard anybody, I'm going to confess too, I've struggled with some of this. And I hate it, and I'm trying to kill it. There's no place for it. But to say that I'm without sin in this area would be a lie. The different cultures and different things I don't make judgments on or have preferences or biases. We need to grow. And man, I actually did something probably a little awkward, I went to a person and I said, I've had issues. I don't like them. I'm embarrassed. I want to ask your forgiveness. I've had prejudice. I don't anymore, I don't think, but I am sorry. And it was embarrassing and humiliating, and I'm just trying to confess my sin. And the person was really gracious. And so I listened. I listened all week. And some of you might wonder, like, Troy doesn't say much on social media. I was listening. And people get mad sometimes. They're like, hey, if there's injustice, there needs to be a quick response, not silence. Well, I'll tell you what, my response wasn't slow. It was just a quick response to listen. So here's what I did all week. I listened to every perspective I could get, every video. I watched videos on systemic racism. I watched Tucker Carlson. I listened to Barack Obama. I listened to George Bush. And by the way, Barack Obama said some amazing things. George W. Bush said some amazing things. I listened to white pastors. I listened to black pastors. I listened to former KKK or white supremacy group members that kind of got out of it. I listened to a talk by a woman that was talking about post-traumatic slave syndrome, never even heard of it. I listen to preachers that have different theology than me. I talk to my black friends, asking them how they're doing. And here's the craziest thing that happened in listening to all this. There's probably a couple. One, this isn't so crazy, but just the unity of hurt in the black community over this. This is galvanized. This has triggered and stirred everything. And if you watch the video and as more stories unfold, I heard somebody say it like this. For years, black people have said this has been going on. Now we're just seeing it. They're just feeling like this has got to stop. And I agree. And I think we have many, many wonderful police officers. I've talked to police officers this week. And I think the vast majority of them are incredible. And so there's so many layers. But all the people across the board know that injustice should stop and that we need to reform so many things. But what surprised me was how this is what happened. Drew Brees, who's a quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, was sharing on Yahoo Finance some questions, and he's a believer, and most people say he's an incredible guy. And he was talking like, I live my life by love the Lord your God with all your heart, love your neighbor, and he's talking about injustice. And then they asked him about the kneeling at the anthem, and Drew Brees said, I will never support anything that disrespects the flag of the United States. I've got grandparents and stuff. And I listened to it, and I wasn't that triggered. But Twitter blew up. His teammates, many, many NFL players and athletes, and black people, black communities just went crazy. And they were so mad. So then, Drew Brees apologizes, and then a bigger mess. The president said he shouldn't have apologized, and Drew Brees apologizes again. But what I learned right there by listening is that we still, as a white community, don't understand the depth and the brokenness. And I understand, I think Drew Brees made a mistake, and he's equating the flag thing, the protest with the flag. They've been Colin Kaepernick and the people have been doing this. It's not about the flag, it's about police brutality. And so I think he made a mistake. I hold that he's a pretty good guy, and I hope he receives grace from the community. However, it made me realize, like, we aren't listening. We haven't heard. There's an anger and a hurt that has not been, we haven't calculated. And man, if somebody asks, like, hey, man, I don't know. Help me understand what you understand. And we listen first. Listening is transforming. I believe it can transform and heal this situation. I think right now, there's a couple other things we can do, but I think right now, it is the key to being Christ in the crisis. Call somebody, ask them, collect information, have discussions, talk with your children. I've just spent this whole week asking so many questions and trying to learn and going, God, show me, reveal my heart, show me, help me to be educated. So the other crazy thing that I learned this week is I had some friends that were talking with black pastors, and they were pastors, and they said to the black pastors, well, we don't know what to do. And I wasn't in this conversation, but I totally agree. They're like, we're white, we live in white neighborhoods, we live in white communities. And the black pastor said, no, we need you. And this got me a little emotional. We need you. For years we've been talking about this, and no one has been listening. We need your voice. We need those that are strong to reach out for the weak. We need those with a voice to speak for those that don't have a voice. And I was stunned because I was like, who am I? And the black church, the black community needs the white church and the white community. They don't have a problem. That's not what it is. They have a problem. We have a problem. And we're going to fix this, right? We're going to continue to progress. That's what former President Obama talked about. We're going to progress and we're going to heal. And so what I want to do is a friend of mine introduced me to a black pastor, and he's been kind enough, his name's Will, and Will's been kind enough to join us on a Zoom call, and I'm just going to let him talk, and I'm going to ask him a few questions and stuff, and so we can just learn, because when we throw out all lives matter, that triggers. What does that mean, and how does that affect a black person when we say, and why do they say Black Lives Matter? And then things like white privilege. I when I first heard that, I recoiled, because I grew up in the country, and we'd actually eat day-old donuts before we threw them to a pig. We were so poor. I didn't feel like white privilege, but what does that mean? And we're going to discuss this. So I would love to invite Will. I'm going to invite him, and I'd love for you to welcome him. You're at home, so it's not like you can applaud. I guess you could. But I'm going to invite Will on the screen, and we're going to have a conversation, and I hope it's a blessing, and we can grow to be Christ in a crisis and be quick to listen, and then engage slowly in a conversation without anger. Well, welcome, Will. I've introduced you. I've been talking with our church about listening. God kind of put it on my heart. When I woke up this Monday, preach on this, I told the Lord I don't really want to. I'm a white man in a white community, and he said, just listen. So I spent my week just listening, and when Norm, our mutual friend, said that you might be interested in talking, and we talked earlier this week. So Will, maybe you just tell us a little bit about yourself. If you're married, I think you're married, I saw a ring, and a little about your life or anything you want to know, and then we just want to listen. What do you want to tell us right now in this crisis?
Yeah, so I grew up my whole life and grew up in Southeast Michigan, in Adrian, just south of Ann Arbor. Then went to school in Kalamazoo at Western Michigan, played football, ran track. Then shortly after that, my wife, after I graduated, and we got married and moved up to Northern Michigan. We've got a son who is 13. And so we've been up here in the Harbor Springs area probably 2 times since 2002, 2003, so quite some time now. I work full-time in the medical device industry. And then also my other full-time job is a pastor of a small church that we planted from Norm's church in Harbor Springs. And we're more so like a network of small groups than we are a big church that gathers. So a little bit different dynamic there, but that's us. That's what we do. And as far as this time, it is interesting. I think as far as, we'll probably get more into it as you and I talk, but I think we first have to realize as followers of Christ, we have a much higher bar and a much higher standard than maybe everything that we see going on in social media and going on in the world. So we have to make sure that, regardless of what feelings come up inside us, because we all have a propensity to treat people that have different color skin than us differently. We have to make sure that we are treating and loving people in a way that is consistent the way Jesus loved us. And so that's kind of going to be the, maybe the main message of all of this once we kind of walk through all these questions. But I think that's really important, because we'll have a tendency to be defensive, to not want to admit that maybe everyone's part of the problem, and we may not want to kind of shine a light on what God is calling us to do. So,
yeah. And we kind of have a few questions. So if anything, I change the script, but what would be what would be your reaction if somebody said, admitted, is it frustration? Is it relief? I think, sometimes admitting our sin is difficult. So maybe if you could expand on that, and like if somebody admitted that they had struggles with racism or preference or discrimination, prejudice, any of these things, how would you feel about all this?
Yeah, so I would say, one because I've experienced it, and two because I'm human as well. We will when we encounter someone that's a different skin color, there's a different reaction inside of us. If I walk down the street of your town and 200 people kind of saw me and encountered me, and then you walk down the street of your town and 200 people saw you, and their reaction is going to be different. Now, we have a choice on how we actually respond to that. Just like with sin, when we're tempted to sin, we have flesh desires that boil up in us. But the question is, how do we respond, or how do we actually act out on those? And I think that the important thing is that it's okay to recognize that we all have this tendency to treat someone of a different skin color differently. I think it's similar to sin when we're evangelizing. People don't want to admit that they're sinners. People don't want to admit that, I don't treat everyone that's a different color the same as I treat people that are like me. That's okay. That's okay to admit. And I don't like to use labels. I don't like to call people racist or anything like that. But I think that's probably part of the problem is people don't want to admit that they do that. And I think it's important we do, because we're sinners. We're broken.
Yeah. And if somebody came up to you and said, "Will, I've struggled with this before. I'm sorry. I'm trying to work on it." Maybe not everybody has the same reaction, but what do you think in general would be the reaction? Would that be healing to the Black community?
It would. I think they just acknowledging, that's a big part, saying, "Hey, I don't understand how, maybe my attitudes have affected the situation, but someone that has that heart that wants to understand, it's important, just to listen and understand and say, hey, how is this situation affecting you? And, maybe I've had these tendencies to treat other people different. What should I do?" I would just say, try to develop a relationship with someone that's got a different skin color, because what I've found, at least the people that have reached out to me, or the people that I've encountered that really have an open heart and they're kind of more sensitive, are ones who have had some kind of significant relationship with someone of color in the past, whether it be a coach, a teacher, a close friend, someone growing up. And so when something like this happens in our culture, their first reaction isn't to try to defend their feelings or kind of be divisive and spin things, but they're like, wow, I wonder how that would affect this person that I know. And then they seek to understand versus just reacting. And I think that's probably a huge first step, in that I don't think happens enough. There's way too much trying to defend our feelings and trying to kind of dismiss the issue.
Yeah. And so you talked about that. Tim Keller talks about this with Brian, I think Stevenson's his name, and he talked about proximity. So things change, right? When you get into close relationship and it's no longer a label or a group, it becomes a friend, a brother. Yeah. That's awesome. How would you suggest, I would love to have a multi-ethnic church. We live in a predominantly white area in Paw Paw. I don't even know if you remember Paw Paw when you're at Kalamazoo.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We showed up.
You got a couple nice restaurants in Paw Paw.
Hey, thank you. Hey, I tell you what, you come down, I'll take you out when they're back open. That'd be awesome.
All right.
Yeah. So what things would you do to talk to somebody? It's like some people in our community, many people are outraged. They don't want this to continue, but they don't know how to be part of the solution. You shared some stuff, if that's enough, but if you want to share more, what would you say to us?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, one of the ways that people stay connected is social media. And social media is great in many ways, and in some ways it's not. I think the first thing, if we've got a sensitive heart and if we're trying to love others, one thing that we don't do is just automatically repost things that are divisive or repost things that may have an insensitive tone. So I would avoid those things, even though it's really tempting because and Norm's daughter Jalen said this. Ask your friends, like, who's on your feed, because the people on our feed, like our Facebook feed, probably in most cases think and are like us, and so we tend to repost and maybe even pile on or add to the conversation in a negative way. So I would say that, and then as far as Christ, addition to call those out that, hey, what you said or what you posted or how I see you behaving might not seem very sensitive to someone who is going through this. Let's talk about that and work that out as fellow followers of Christ, because we're called to a higher standard. Yeah. And so that, I think that's those two things are real important steps. And then I think the third is when you hear someone that's Black that has gone through something or is telling a story, or maybe you have an opportunity to have a conversation, I would say just listen. Try to put yourself in their shoes and just understand where they're coming from, instead of trying to first dismiss or maybe even defend the other side.
Yeah. Well, let's get into some of those things on Facebook. Some trigger words: Black Lives Matter, white privilege. I'm trying to think if there's some others, but let's just stick with those two. And if there's any other offensive or things, and I cringe now when people put all lives matter. But at first, and white privilege at first, I told you when we talked, kind of triggered me, but I kind of have understanding. Tell us why people say, or why it resonates with African-American people, that Black Lives Matter. Let's start with that one.
Yeah, so, Black Lives Matter, the statement, and not necessarily talking about the organization, but when people say Black Lives Matter, what they're trying to draw attention to is that in, the recent and maybe even not so recent history, there's been some consistent, I guess, mistreatment or even killing of Black men in a different proportion than to the rest of the population. So to bring that issue to light, someone might say Black Lives Matter, and it seems insensitive when someone comes back and says all lives matter. And I shared this analogy with you the other day is, if you've got a family of 5 and everyone's sitting down at the table eating dinner, and the youngest boy, Johnny, doesn't have any food on his plate, and everyone's eating, and Johnny says, I'm hungry, and everyone kind of ignores him. And, life goes on. Like the next night, everybody, dinner served, and he's sitting there, no one gives him any food. There's food on his plate. And Johnny says, I'm hungry. And one of his siblings, or maybe the mom or the dad, looks at Johnny and says, you know what, Johnny, everybody's hungry, but Johnny's the only one that doesn't have food on his plate. Yeah. Of course, when it's dinner time, everyone's hungry. But if one person consistently does not have food on their plate, then it's valid for them to say, I'm hungry. And that's kind of what we're dealing with when people say Black Lives Matter. It's a community that we feel like we are in many ways still being treated differently, and not in all situations. But I think that's important. And when someone says all lives matter, it's not insensitive when said in response to it. Not that all lives don't matter. We know all lives matter. That's an obvious truth. But saying Black Lives Matter is trying to bring attention to some of the things that are happening in the Black community.
Yeah.
As far as some of the other terms, and I told you before, I don't like to put labels on people, like using the term white privilege or racist or thugs or any of that, because when we use those labels, it almost gives us permission to treat an entire people group the same way or have a certain attitude. So, for example, you look at the situation with George Floyd, and people could look at the cop and say, well, because that cop did that, all cops are bad, or cops are racist, or all white people are racist, and give people permission to say, well, I can have an attitude, cops can have a certain attitude about white people, because now I put that, and that's not fair. The flip side of this is true when we look at the protests, people that go out and protest and are trying to bring attention to the issue. You have a couple bad apples, and things, turn to riot and looting. Now, all the protesters are kind of put in this category of thugs. And so when people see the protest, they have the image of all the bad stuff that is going. So it leads them to discount the message or the reason that they're protesting, because they put this label of all thugs. Look at how they're burning the cities down, or rioting or looting. So I really try to avoid some of those labels, and really try to, and again, some of that's having relationships with people will prevent you from doing that. But it's important that we don't kind of try to put tags or labels on everything, because we'll find ourselves kind of grouping a whole set of people into that term.
Yeah. And we're having a little audio issue, but what I'm hearing from you is watch out for labels, and make sure we connect with people in their story. I actually talked to a police officer, and he talked about that. The key in his neighborhoods was that everybody had a story, and getting to know the people. And I think one of the things that I would say to the white church is, like, people, okay, so don't put labels on other people, but if people put a label on you and say, well, you're white privilege, I try to take the spot, and I want to see your reaction, is these people are hurting. Usually when somebody calls a name or labels you, if you give them the benefit, they're hurting, and there's something more substance to that than, like, we think you grew up rich in a country club. They're actually saying we've had some difficulties, right? That you may not have faced as a white person. And I think that's where you can get a talking point. Like, I would be hard pressed for me to believe that anybody would think, like, I don't have grandparents that could have been lynched or couldn't eat at a restaurant. So I've kind of come to peace with white privilege. It triggered me at first, but realizing they're talking like we've had some disadvantage. Would that be a fair point of view?
That's fair, and I think it's important to think of it like that, because not everyone is going to respond maybe the way you want. And I'm going to keep saying this: as followers of Christ, we have a much higher standard. We've been given a significant amount of grace. So that means we have to offer a lot of grace. And I was talking to a friend yesterday. We were just talking about different situations and experience that I've gone through. And I said, when someone treats me different, or when I sense that someone has a problem with the color of my skin, don't get upset. I try to, think of it from a grace standpoint and give them the benefit of the doubt. It's like they're treating me that way because they don't know Will Henagan. And if they knew me, they wouldn't treat me that way, because it is real easy when a label gets put on you, when someone treats you differently, to build up resentment, and to even maybe lash back and kind of call out on it almost in a negative way. So I think that it goes both ways. We have to give people a lot of grace, especially when people are hurting, because we know hurt people. So we either continue the cycle or stop the cycle and have a conversation.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. This is one question I asked you that I felt like, wow, this could get real touchy. And I still don't feel comfortable with it, because I want to be respectful, but a lot of what people see of the Black culture, there's a lot of, like, if they, and I know this is not true because I know I've went to other countries and they, like, in America, everybody's rich and has a sports car, but there's a portion that celebrates violence, maybe, that there's statistics that there is a lot of crime in the Black community. And I think for some people and good people, they go, how do I deal with that? Because I'm a little scared, or it seems like that culture's violent. They don't want to treat anybody bad. But for example, I'll just be real honest. They might see a couple Black men and they're scared. And what is your advice as there is somewhat of a culture of, at times at least, presented in the public eye of violence and gangs, and it's a messy question. I'm not trying to be offensive. How do we deal with those maybe unwanted reactions that are caused by experience or things that we know? Is that offensive?
No.
Okay.
So there's a long history as far as why there are large populations of Black people in low income neighborhoods, and wherever you go in the world, where there's poverty and where there is rough environments, there's going to be increased crime. It's kind of survival. The thing that we have to make sure we don't do is kind of put that label on everyone that we would see that maybe fits the description, so to speak. Going into a rough neighborhood, the same crime element that maybe white people are afraid of is going through a rough neighborhood. There's got to be a degree to being street smart. You don't want to put yourself in a bad situation. And I know the Black community has really tried to fight this for a long time, as far as how do we make our community safer? How do we allow kids to grow up in a better environment so they're not continuing that cycle? So I think it's I can understand there being a fear, like if you're going through what may look like a bad neighborhood, but I think encountering someone on a daily basis out at the grocery store or in a normal environment, I think again, our natural reaction is that person is different than me, and you maybe some of those feelings or perceptions of what you see of the Black community negative ones may rise up, but that's when you have to draw on the Holy Spirit and say, you know what, I want to react a certain way because I have these feelings, but I'm not, because I want to treat this person just like I would someone that's like me. And you may be surprised that a smile or engaging someone like that, how that really changes the dynamic of the situation. So, answer, yeah, obviously, if you're in a bad neighborhood, a bad environment, you have to be street smart. But, for the most part, I would say most Black people are trying, we're doing our best as well. And we put our shoes on just like you.
And I think it probably goes back, as you're saying this, it just reminds me of the proximity. Is if you, when Tim Keller was talking with Brian Stevenson, he talked about a dentist that offered free medical care to some African American children. And all of a sudden, he started understanding more of the issues and really getting that personal relationship. I think you shared when people adopt a child from a ethnic situation, or they, all of a sudden the light bulb goes on, and no longer is it fighting my position. Your heart breaks for the person, and that brings a lot of healing. So that's been helpful to understand.
No, having trying to engage in some kind of relationship with someone that's different than you is going to be really important. And aside from that, maybe you don't have anyone that you can reach out to and have a conversation with. I would say go back and look at the history of America from the viewpoint of someone who's Black or African American, and say, maybe generationally, what did this person's family, what did this person's path look like? What does their story look like? Because then I think it allows us to empathize a lot more with, well, this is why they're in this situation, and this is why maybe they have this attitude, and it's not it's not unwarranted. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. Any final thoughts? You've been awesome. It's been enlightening. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything you want to share?
I think again, the important thing is we as followers of Christ are called peacemakers, and God wants us to lead the way. If anyone in this country is going to help move the needle in the right direction and lead the way, it's going to be followers of Christ, no matter what color. So I think taking, maybe this week, taking a different approach or different position when encountering, engaging in social media, engaging with people in the public, when this topic comes up, is like, as followers of Christ, here's how we should handle this situation.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Will. Be blessed. I really appreciate it. And I love your haircut. Is that something Norm's bald too? Most people haven't seen Norm, but all the good pastors are bald, right?
Keep it simple.
All right. Well, hey, thank you very much, and you be blessed. Thanks for taking your some time. And maybe when all things get settled down, we can do a pastor swap or something, or you can come down here, or I can come up there. I'd love to meet you in person.
Absolutely, Troy. I appreciate you having me, and I look forward to seeing you in the near future.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, again, I want to thank Will, and hopefully that was encouraging for you. And there's a whole bunch of things to think about there. But again, I just think this is a huge spiritual principle that God can bring to help us to be Christ, to love and heal, expose our sin. So I just want to give you a few response applications. To be Christ in the crisis response, listen and pray. What I've tried to do this week, as I've listened to everything that I could and bring in everything, and practice a principle, I just want to say this: people don't want to know. They don't care how much you know. They want to know how much you care. That phrase, I think that is significant, even though it's not a biblical verse, but a significant thing that is true. We listen and we care, and then we pray. We pray what we can do. I had friends over, and I was talking to them this week, and they were saying they were praying about the virus, like, and the response to the virus. We just need to pray, like, God, what do you want me to do? What doors do you want me to open up? What things like that I've listened to this week? What things resonate with the scriptures? And basically going like this: everything I've listened to, Holy Spirit, will you tell me what I need to keep and remove the rest, and then move me to action? The next thing is, he did a great job talking about this. Don't label. I mean, all protesters, I think this is kind of jumbled because we've all been on Zoom calls. All protesters aren't looters. All black people aren't thugs or criminals. All police are not racist. All white people. We move away from labels and get close. We get close by hearing. We get close by asking. Maybe we get involved in some places where we go, okay, I'm going to go to this organization. I'm going to see where I can help and learn. And when it becomes not a statistic, because statistics never include a story. And when you start hearing the story of people, and there are people that have made the news from our church in the midst of this. And I just want to be real vague on this, but made the news, and people can say, oh, look at this person and vilify them. And there's a story. And when you understand people's stories, and that's what Jesus did, he got to know people's stories, and he had a leg up that he knew their story, but he got to know who they are and what they were struggling with and felt what they were feeling, and then went from that position. So don't label and get close. And examine your heart and challenge others. Like I said, the heart that's a person that's lied the most to you is probably yourself. Your heart, examine it. And challenge other people. One of the things that hearing the black pastors and hearing other people is like, they're not going to be able, when somebody's racist, they're probably not going to maybe reveal it around an African-American person or a person of color, but they may reveal it to us and we can say, hey man, that's a no-fly zone. We don't do that. Or if you're not confrontational, ask like, why do you feel that way? Why do you label that? Have you ever met somebody? Have you ever talked to somebody about this? These are the ways that I think Christ would want us to respond. And then love and do good. Jesus talks about loving our enemies. Paul talks about heaping burning coals on the head of our enemies. And that was actually a way to love and show care for them. It's a complicated exegesis on that. But he says, don't be overcome with evil. Let good overcome evil. Let us do good. And here's the thing. This has been stressful. This has been overwhelming. But if the church has ever wondered if it's needed, if we have a voice, we're important, can we contribute? The world is so dark and hopeless right now. There are so many ways. We got our hashtag to encourage and build up. We have our hashtag 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Even if you're not into hashtagging, let's practice that. Let's think of ways that we can love and encourage. I heard 2 stories this week that kind of emphasize this picture. This is so healing to see a police officer hugging a person of color, and this is in New York. But I heard on Facebook a friend of mine saying she went into a coffee shop, and a black woman who had just got done jogging asked a white police officer, if she could buy him a coffee. And he said, man, I've actually got a big order, but she's like, well, I care about you and I care about your safety. And I'm getting goosebumps from that right now. I think that hope, when hope appears and hope is extended and grace is given, there can be so much healing. Just from something like that. The girl wrote on Facebook, I went out of that coffee shop feeling happy and full and feeling like there's hope in the world because one black woman said something to a white police officer. What a gracious, awesome move. And as Will said, as Christians, our standard is so high to love and do good and build up and encourage. Another story was a police officer friend of mine came over and I was talking with him and his wife said, and she said it several different ways. I can't express what it means, but a black man in the community came up and said, I respect you, I love you, I care what you're doing, just some kind words. And she said, you don't know how much that meant. And so right now, grace is in short supply. Kindness, gentleness is in short supply. And these are the things that God has given us. Let's spend them. Let's share them. Let's do good. Let's show people, let's smile towards other people and extend love and kindness because we are called to the ministry of reconciliation. And Paul delabeled everything when he said there's no longer Jew, no longer Greek, no longer slave, no longer freeman. We're all one in Christ. Let's shine, church. Right now, the world doesn't have answers. And thankfully, the good part is we know there's a problem and the problem's getting highlighted, but everybody's trying to give solutions and answers and statistics. And this is what we need to do. Let's be Jesus and love our neighbor and be kind and good in these things and begin to heal. Would the church rise up? And would we be the voice for the voiceless? And man, I'd love you to continue to dialogue with us. If you're doing church as a group, Ash talked about that. We're doing watch parties. These are questions that you could do like as a community group. They may be a little small, but pause your TV and get the person with the best eyes and look at it. But just talking through some of these things, hoping to expose some of that invisible sin, hoping to give us a better perspective and hoping to like equip us to have grace and love for people. God bless. We love you. Everything we need is in God. All the struggles, cast your cares upon him. Oh, and I wanted to share this. I'm going to go back here. If you need somebody to listen and pray with you because you're just overwhelmed, go onto our webpage, and I believe they may have to put a little bar on this, but I believe you go to the help page and it's Oasis. We just have a ministry that if you feel like you're going through a desert, they do everything we've talked about. It'd be a crime not to share it, is they listen and they pray and they'd love to help you. So if you little different context, but if you go, man, I'm listening and I'm praying about this thing, but I need somebody to listen and pray for me, we want to extend that to you. God bless, have a great week, and we will update you and get together soon.